Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and a few days ago, I had the incredible honor of interviewing a very, very special space champion, Mr. Daniel Goldin. Mr. Goldin served as the ninth and longest tenured NASA administrator from April 1st, 1992 to November 17th, 2001. He was appointed by President George H.W. Bush and also served under Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. Before coming to NASA, Mr. Goldin was Vice President and General Manager of the TRW Space and Technology Group, where he led project for America's defense and managed the production of advanced communication spacecraft, space technologies, and scientific instruments. He began his career at NASA's Lewis Research Center, where he worked on electric propulsion systems for human interplanetary travel. For his incredible revolutionary work at NASA and in the aerospace industry, he was presented with the 1998 Laurel Award. Mr. Goldin's journey is incredibly inspiring, and I had the great honor of learning about his story and being able to share it with all of you on Ignited Thinkers YouTube channel. So I hope you enjoy our interview together. So before we dive into your incredible journey, I wanted to start off by talking about your powerful work as the former NASA administrator. With your leadership, there were many changes. Some highlights that stood out to me were an increase in funding for science and aerospace technology, an increased number of missions that launched per year, decreased space shuttle costs, and the redesigning of the ISS. So I was curious, during your tenure at NASA, what was your main goal? And how did you see this vision change during your tenure at NASA?
I wrote down on a piece of paper before I went into my Senate confirmation hearing. The way it works is you get nominated by the president, and then the Senate has to decide if you're acceptable. And I wrote down a list of things that I wanted to accomplish. And when I left, I went back through the list and I did all but one thing. And I never changed over the course of that 10 years. I knew what needed to be done. What needed to be done was there was an agency of brilliant people, and they got used to spending money without accountability. So, what I decided to do to get everybody's attention was the budget was projected to go from $14.3 billion, that's with a B, to $25 billion from 1992 when I started till 2002. I left a few months before 2002, left in November instead of January. And I said the best way of having an agency that performs at its best is to make it frugal. So when I met with the President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, I told him I was going to commit NASA for 10 years to no budget increase. And I also was going to request that they didn't correct my budget for inflation. Now, that meant that people couldn't do everything they wanted. In life, you have to prioritize. What's the first thing I want to do, the second thing, the third thing, the fourth thing? I made it very clear. I made it very clear if I was to be confirmed what I would do, 1 to X. And I also made it clear to get brilliant people to focus, you can't have an abundance of funds. You need to be frugal. I grew up in a family where we didn't have money. I lived in a house, a teeny tiny house, with my parents, my two sisters, my grandparents, my grandfather's brother, and my mother's sister. And in fact, I shared a bunk bed with my uncle. I was in the top bunk, he was in the bottom. We sat around the table. We made decisions about how do we spend money for food, How do we spend money for transportation? So I felt setting priorities is the way to go. And you want to know something? The people at NASA and our partners around the globe are so terrific. They got it. Oh, yeah, there was some complaining, and the complainers left. But and the other thing, I didn't want to hurt people. And in order to meet the budget, we had to go from 25,000 to 17,000 people. And I didn't want to have forced layoffs because it's pretty hard on people. And sometimes you can't afford it. It is what it is. So I went to the President of the United States and I said, I'd like to do something that's never been done before. I'd like to have a buyout. There are a lot of senior employees that are ready to retire. What if we give them a financial bonus to leave? And sure enough, we went from 25,000 to 17,000 without one forced layoff.
Wow, incredible. I mean, it's amazing to hear how you stuck with your goals, but also the way you maneuvered this idea of a fixed budget and accountability of prioritizing what is NASA's priority. And within these, you had one of the longest tenures, and you were part of the aerospace industry as it evolved to,
It's not one of the longest,
it
it
is
is the longest by
the
a huge
longest.
amount.
Yes, the longest tenured, and you were you were part of the aerospace industry as it changed so much, even just in the past 10 years. So, through your eyes, how did the aerospace sector change over the past 20, 30 years? And where do you see the future of the aerospace industry going?
It's changed to some degree, but it hasn't changed enough. I'm not very pleased. Um, there's some private companies, and they're providing cost efficient services. And certainly, SpaceX has the most efficient services. They have a very terrific safety record. There are other good companies too. And this is taking some of the burden off of national budgets. But what have they done? Um, in the field of space exploration, I don't feel in the last 20 years we have done what we ought to be doing. And especially one of the areas that's of biggest concern to me is enabling people to go to space with ever better efficiency and an ability to go deeper and not stay in Earth orbit. And by the way, the moon is in Earth orbit if you didn't realize. To be able to finally leave Earth orbit with human beings. And we have, in my mind, as a nation, as a global enterprise, failed at enabling humans to go deeper into space because with modern biology, we have not changed the basic principles of spacesuits, of cleansing the air, of recycling fluids. We're using physics and chemistry, we're not using biology. And we are not protecting the astronauts to the degree that they need to be protected. Um, we still don't understand how to protect the astronauts. On Earth, we have 1G, and all the fluids in our body go down to our feet. When we go to space, there's no gravity, so the fluids shift. It puts huge stress on the brain, on the eyes, on I could go through every last function. And here we are, 20 years after I left, and we're still locked in Earth orbit. In the area of space physics and astrophysics and astrobiology and understanding the sun and understanding the interactions of the oceans, the air, the geoid that we live on, and our environment, we haven't really scratched the surface there. and we have, I don't know, 7, 8 billion people living on this planet. It would be nice to understand those interactions to a greater degree. So while people celebrate every time SpaceX sends up a rocket and maybe we'll have better communications, we are light years from where I expected us to be when I left. And you can't stay in a job like that forever. My wife helped me make the decision to leave because she knew I was tired. Carrying that load was enormous. And by the way, almost 6 out of 10 astronauts that have gone to Earth orbit and came back to Earth happened under the very narrow 10 years in a 70-year or 80-year program. Under my direction, no one got a scratch. They came back safely. So if you add up the SpaceX people going to orbit, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, everyone, 6 out of 10 went safely under my direction. So am I unhappy? Yes. I think as a nation, no one person is responsible. Lots of people have done good things. I set out a vision when I went to NASA in 1962, and I thought in 1980 we would be on Mars. So here we are, 44 years later. We didn't achieve my objective. I didn't go to graduate school. When John F. Kennedy gave his speech in August at Rice University, we go to space not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Came home and told my parents that I was that was the last summer before I was going to finish up school. I told my parents I'm not going to graduate school. I'm going right to NASA, and that's exactly what I did. And I was working on a spacecraft that would have had the capacity to getting to Mars in 1980. So everyone celebrates what a great job all the space agencies of the world are doing, all the private companies are doing. But basically, we've been locked in Earth orbit for the 5 billion years that this planet has existed. The species has been there less. So what could I say? No, I'm not happy.
I think that's very valuable insight because, as you mentioned, we tend to get caught up with the very, constant, we see on the news, on X, like every launch that's happening, and we get very distracted very easily and tend to kind of lose sight of this bigger picture of this timeline of where we were going 20 years ago and where we're trying to get to now in the next 20 years. And it's a very interesting idea of talking about this, and it's a very great insight. Thank you for, bringing this up because many people don't view it like that, and it's a perspective not many people share. So I really appreciate you bringing that into light. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but obviously notice your huge passion for space. You mentioned you didn't go to graduate school, and you were like, I need to go to NASA and get my hands, into this. Your passion for space is clearly very, very evident. And so I'm curious, what was your aha moment that inspired you to pursue a career in the aerospace sector? Was it a launch? Was it a teacher? What was the starting moment to your story in space?
Wasn't a teacher, it was my father, who is the most amazing human being on this planet. Uh, he he studied science, biology in college, but he graduated during the Great Depression of the 30s. There were no jobs. It was a very difficult time for him, but he never lost his passion for science. And as I grew up, we did science experiments in the house with just very simple things. And my uncle, who lived in the house, my uncle Manny, he had a toy store. And in the toy stores, they used to do some pretty progressive things in the 40s. Uh, they had Gilbert chemistry sets. And one day he brought home this Gilbert chemistry set, and I don't know, I may have been 5 years old. I was playing with chemicals, and I had an uncle who was in World War II. When he came home from World War II, by the way, they came with their two children and all their boxes to our little house. But he built model planes out of balsa wood and this tissue paper and tester's glue. And he taught me how to build planes. So at 5 and 6 years old, I was building planes, and I got I think it's called an OK Cub engine. I think that's what it was. And I got these engines, and I was able, you had to start it and make sure you don't lose your finger. So I flew planes, and then my father, at 7 years old, took me to the Museum of Natural History in New York City, and we went to the Hayden Planetarium, and they sprinkled the stars onto that spherical dome. And then we walked through the exhibits, and I saw an asteroid. It landed on Earth, and they put it in the case, and they said, "This is where it came from."
Yeah.
And it was like click. And I went to the library. We don't have libraries anymore. And it was a pretty long walk. And my mother would take me, and then I would go by myself. And then I'd read books on astronomy. I began to read books on natural sciences. And I knew when I was 7 what I was going to do. There wasn't any space program. There were rockets, but they were rockets, the V2 and the V1 from World War II. They were rockets of destruction, not rockets of exploration. And it wasn't really until John F. Kennedy became president that we got highly focused. And isn't it interesting? Starting from scratch and never building a moon rocket, 8 years, 1969. How long is it going to take to go back? Why are we going back to the moon? What's there? A lunar economy? I don't know if there's a lunar economy. What I do know is that humans must push the boundaries to first understand the interaction between the different forces impacting our own planet and understand it to the point that we can make a healthier society and economy. And then why aren't we leaving Earth's orbit and getting new resources and new opportunities and new possibilities? And we keep doing the same old thing. Yeah, terrific. We're going to get better communications, and SpaceX has launched, I don't know how many thousands of satellites. How does that relate to the future of humanity?
You mentioned a very great point. And first off, I think it's wonderful to hear your story of how a small little science kit and building those planes really changed your perspective and made you realize that this is what you want to do. I think a lot of students can relate with your story. I think a lot of students have the opportunity to do hands-on experiments in classrooms and being able to gain the confidence to be like, hey, this is what I want to do, or this is something I'm interested in pursuing the rest of my career in. It's something I can definitely relate to. I mentioned to you before we started this interview, a small rocketry club unit in my school sparked my passion for space. And so those experiences are definitely universal. And as you mentioned, it's very critical that we not only focus on just launching things into space or repeating these important missions, but also trying to expand and really understand our planet, the interactions between the sun and our planet and what's really happening in our galaxy. I think you mentioned some very, very key points that future missions should really tackle to understand these root questions. And in your journey, you mentioned you started out working at NASA, and you were before going to grad school, you went to NASA and
Did
then you
I
kind of
hold
stayed
you
there.
up for a minute? You said, how did these experiences change my view on what I'm doing? They didn't change my view, they formulated my view. There's a big difference between the two. I was a blank piece of paper when I came into this world, and every child is a blank piece of paper, to use a metaphor, and you could fill in that paper with beautiful artwork, or you could fill that paper with complaints and concerns and emptiness. Every life, every single life on this planet is important. Every person is important. But each person is responsible for their own growth. Their parents will help launch them, the schools will educate them, but they are a vessel. That vessel will have a wonderful trip for, I don't know, 70 to 100 years, but you are the pilot of that vessel. The vessel doesn't move, the vessel doesn't make progress unless energy is added. And this is the energy of exploration. And the best time to explore is between the first moments that you learn how to move your fingers, which is another part of the experience. I remember I have two daughters. I now have grandchildren. I'm going to hopefully have great grandchildren. But just watching the process of my daughters pick up a Cheerio, first they would put the Cheerios on the table in front of them, and they had to figure out how to take their fingers and grab the Cheerio. How do you first grab it? And they knew it was something that was of value. And then how do you manipulate it? And how do you get it into your mouth without falling out? That took a couple of days. So what I'm trying to say is every child has a learning process, and you could accelerate or you could stand still. It's your choice. You could be angry, you could get frustrated, but I have an expression: God helps those who help themselves. And you need to care for yourself. Society isn't going to take care of you. You have to build your own trajectory for life. And when you put the energy in, and you're going to fail. My daughters, it took them time. They couldn't pick up the Cheerio. And then when they could pick up the Cheerio, then how did they get it in their mouth? It doesn't happen by magic. And some children learn faster than others. It's not good. It's not, but failure, you can't learn to walk without falling down. And everyone listening here ought to think about that. You can't learn to drive a car without making mistakes. I had to learn how to cut the balsa wood. My parents didn't have money and I couldn't afford to make mistakes, but I did make mistakes. And then you have to learn how to deal with the mistakes that you're making. And then after a while, just like all of a sudden, my daughter, oldest daughter, and younger, they were eating Cheerios, and then they could do incredible things with their fingers. So, and my younger daughter developed a love of art. So life is about the investment you make in yourself and the care you have for others. And life is much better if you focus, accept failure, learn how to overcome those failures. Nothing is destined.
100%. I'm really glad you said that because it really changed my perspective and also just the way you think about a certain situation, which everyone, regardless of what stage they are in their life, should view everything as. It's not, oh, how can society help me? But it's how can I achieve what I want to do? And the way you worded that was so perfect with, every child starts off with a blank page and you can dream of what you want to become. And there's sometimes we tend to say that this is stopping me from doing this, and we tend to give ourselves excuses. And talking as a student perspective, I think we tend to want to give ourselves excuses to say we can't do this because of this. But you just, as you've said right now, that's completely false. I mean, there are barriers, but if you have that will to kind of push over that and like, I want to do this and I'm going to figure out a way to get there, there is a way to do it to some. It's just in a different pathway for everyone, as you said. But I think that's such an important statement. Uh,
Let me add to that and say Every morning at a certain time, the sun rises, and every evening at a certain time, the sun sets. You'll be sleeping, and let's say you sleep 8 hours, you have some personal business to take care of at each end to get ready for sleep and to get ready for the day. Okay, so you have let's be generous and say it half hour at each end. That's 9 hours. Wow, that's a lot of time to do amazing things. Now you could sit and you could play with this and you could send emails and texts and go to YouTube, or you could do things. And what happens in life is some people highly focus and they take advantage of that time in between getting ready for sleep and getting ready for the day. It's a lot of time. And life is about understanding how to harvest that time and being positive. Complaining wastes so much time. Being jealous wastes so much time. You're in charge of your vessel for this 70 to 100-year trip. I'm now ready to go to the next question.
No, I absolutely love that. And I will definitely, and I'm sure everyone who's listening will deeply carry that advice. And, the next time I'm on my phone, I'll think, is it productive? And definitely everyone should be thinking, what can I do with my time that isn't a positive and productive way? I thank you for saying that. And it kind of perfectly segues into what my next question for you was going to be. I think we tend to see your incredible accomplishments, and you mentioned you didn't have an easy, life growing up, and we tend to see your accomplishments and are like, oh, Mr. Golden's a genius. He knew what he was doing from day one. But did you have obstacles in your journey? And if so, how did you overcome them? Because many times we get stuck with one point in our life and are like, oh, how can I get past this? And oftentimes give up and just change directions. What would your advice be to anyone in any stage of their career, maybe particularly young professionals who are trying to overcome an obstacle? How did you overcome your own?
These are not my accomplishments. I was an enabler. It is the amazing people at NASA. It is the people who support them from universities. It's our international partners. I like to think of myself not as the one who accomplished, but as the orchestra leader. I set the beat. I enabled, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people to achieve great things individually. And then I got the music to sound melodic instead of staccato. So that's what I view to keep things focused, to keep people motivated. So they're not my accomplishments, they're the accomplishments of the incredible team that I worked with and I helped guide. Okay, now coming back to your question, I never give up. I never, never, never give up. I could be annoying. I frustrate some people. Some people grossly dislike me, but I know I'm in charge of my own vessel. This is what I'm in charge of. And I don't allow statements by people about what can't be done. If I believe it could be done, I'll keep driving till I understand that maybe it's not possible. And in the process, I don't make some people happy. And I don't care what other people think about me. Does it hurt? Yeah. But will I allow it to stop me? And there are many things that happen. Now, on the other hand, I'm not in charge of the budget for the United States. I have to live with the limitations that I had to, not now, but I had to live with the limitations that the Congress and the president and the American people put on. Now, I thought I was pretty effective in communicating, and I was fortunate to have worked for three wonderful presidents. George H.W. Bush, an amazing man. William Jefferson Clinton, an ability to understand human nature, and he took me to my limits on physics sometimes and biology and discussions I had with him. And then George W. Bush, highly focused, all of them different, but all with the same common goal of enabling the American people and our partners around the world to have a higher quality of life. But I couldn't universally say, do this, do that. So I had to live sometimes with the limitations that by every right, and the Congress, of course, the House and the Senate. So, in addition to being determined, I also believe I'm adaptive. And when um, just think about you're riding a bike going really fast and an obstacle appears in the way. You have to adapt. You have no choice. If you're going fast and you hit that obstacle, you're going to fail and hurt yourself. So life is about not complaining when an immovable object gets in your way. You can't waste energy trying to move an immovable object. What you need to do is get real, become an adult, and say, this can't be changed, and I will not have an excuse for failure. Now, let me give you one more uh, example. And this is how I break people up into groups. Just do a little. Albert Einstein had what he called a Gedanken experiment, a thought experiment in your head. So let's do this thought experiment. Uh, you're standing, and I have an ability to move the ceiling above you. So let me ask you, if the ceiling was 6 inches above your fingertips, could you jump and touch the ceiling?
Really? Yeah.
Good. 2 inches,
Yes.
3 inches,
Yes.
4 inches,
Yes.
five,
Yes.
6,
Yes. I think I could do six. Yes.
1 foot.
Um, yes.
2 feet.
Yes.
You could do 2 feet.
I
Okay.
feel like, I mean, I played basketball growing up. I think I could do two
Okay,
feet.
good. Okay, good. How about 10 feet?
No.
Okay. So I group people into a few different approaches. There are those who will, let's say you have a capacity to jump 9 inches.
Okay.
Some people will stop at 6 and be guaranteed success. And you got to watch out for these people because they will not take on tough jobs. And then there are those who say they could jump 3 feet when they could only jump one. watch out for them because they have an excuse for failure. See, if you say you could do more and then you fail, well, I have a reason for failure. The people who I like are the ones who pick a 50-50 point. There's a 50% chance of success and a 50% chance of failure. And that's where I try and conduct my life.
Very, very smart way of thinking, and that's very true. I think you should never underestimate or give yourself like I can't do that much, but you shouldn't overexert yourself at the same time. So I see the balance. Very smart.
Now, there will be circumstances in life where, when life and death depends on it, you have to figure out how to do the impossible. So, what I said had to do with on average, and there were times I had to deal with the impossible. And for the most part, succeeded, but I've had failures. And you need to be prepared to accept them and not complain and have excuses.
Oh, God. Yeah, I think that's, definitely a perfect place. I know we already spent a lot of time talking, but I really think this is a really perfect way to end and give the advice to every student who's listening. I think life sometimes there are immovable objects, immovable obstacles, as you were saying, but finding a way to not just spend your energy on necessarily moving something that seems difficult, but trying to find alternative pathways to still achieving that same goal. And realizing that you can do what you set your mind to is also a very important important perspective to have, especially when you're talking about how we are in control of our own vessel and what we can do with it. It's something I will definitely carry with me as I progress throughout my education and even beyond into life. And I'm positive everyone who's listening as well is incredibly inspired by your story and what you've been able to do with your incredible team. So thank you so much, Mr. Goldin, for taking your time to do this interview. I had such an honor being able to speak with you and learn really great insights on what you believe is the most important next steps for the aerospace sector. And of course, learning about your personal journey. So thank you for doing this interview.
My pleasure, and I expect to hear from you in 10 years as one of the leading thoughts in space medicine.
Thank you so much.